So those of you who have a book or a electronic device, you can cue into chapter 15, verse 3, 4. Can I get a tissue paper, like a napkin or something like that? The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world, no one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with strong determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began, and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. So the purport's not too lengthy. It is now clearly stated that the real form of this banyan tree cannot be understood in this material world, since its root is upward. The extension of the real tree is at the other end. When entangled with the material expansions of the tree, one cannot see how far the tree extends, nor can one see the beginning of this tree. Yet one has to find out the cause. I am the son of my father is the son of such and such person, etc. By searching in this way, one comes to Brahma, who is generated by Garbhodakshai Vishnu. Finally, in this way, when one reaches the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the end of research work. One has to search out that origin of this tree, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through the association of persons who are in knowledge of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then, by understanding, one becomes gradually detached from this false reflection of reality. And by knowledge, one can cut off the connection and actually become situated in the real tree. The word asanga is important in this connection because the attachment for sense enjoyment and lording it over material nature is very strong. Therefore, one must learn detachment by discussion of spiritual science based on authoritative scripture, and one must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. As a result of such discussion, in the association of devotees, one comes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then the first thing one must do is surrender to him. The description of that place, whence having gone one never returns to this false reflected tree, is given here. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original root from whom everything has emanated. To gain favor of that Personality of Godhead, one has only to surrender, and this is the result of performing devotional service by hearing, chanting, etc. He is the cause of the extension of the material world. This has already been explained by the Lord himself. Aham sarvasya prabhava. I am the origin of everything. Therefore, to get out of the entanglement of the strong banyan tree of material life, one must surrender to Krishna. As soon as one surrenders unto Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. So, the verse again. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. So, this is a very nice chapter, and this analogy is very powerful. We find it usually much easier to grasp philosophical concepts when they're given to us in the shape of a metaphor. And this metaphor, of course, is a banyan tree. And we see that in lots of cultures, and lots of times, in lots of places, trees and forests are used as an example or a metaphor or model of the material world, so we can kind of grasp some of the more bizarre aspects of this world that we live in. We see here the whole material world being compared to an upside-down banyan tree. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there are also other similar metaphors, that we have another part in Srimad Bhagavatam, the story of the merchant who goes into the forest, again that. And we hear in Buddhist culture about nirvana. It actually means near, out, vana, forest, out of the forest. So this kind of metaphor of trees and forests, and of course in English we have the common saying that you can't see the forest for the trees. So in a forest, generally people can feel ill at ease, especially if you're in a deep forest somewhere where you're in a real natural forest and there are animals who might even be predators in that forest. So it's natural for humans, especially at night, to feel ill at ease in the middle of a forest. And so jungles, forests are synonymous with a world that appears to be natural, yet is not necessarily completely friendly to us. And this is what makes us feel uncomfortable. Now, the banyan tree is a strange metaphor in one sense, because we hear about it as being upside down, which strikes us as strange. As we said last week, we discussed the verse prior to this, that in the world we experience actually two places where we have an upside down tree. One of them is when we look at a reflection of a tree in a body of water. The tree is upside down. We actually have an upside down tree. And so similarly, this banyan tree is a reflection of the real tree. In the spiritual world, there's the real world. And here we have the virtual world, the reflected world, the upside down world. And the fact that this world is upside down is not a very difficult to grasp concept. Most of us, I think, have some notion of that this world appears upside down in some ways. But we're not exactly clear why it appears that way. So a banyan tree is also mysterious, as we described last week, because the limbs of the banyan tree, they shoot out in various angles, and from those limbs drop little feeders, and they kind of grow and grow and grow until they reach the ground, and then they become roots. So the banyan tree does have normal roots like a regular tree, but it also grows new sets of roots from expansion feelers that come down from the limbs, and eventually those expansion little extensions that go into the ground, they become almost trees in themselves. They get big, they get root systems themselves, and they grow. So a banyan forest and a banyan tree, there's not a clear distinction between those things. A banyan forest may even be a single banyan tree, but it's expanded, through many, many different downward projections. So, of course, in the middle of a forest, we usually do feel confused, and there's a tangle of undergrowth. So this material world we live in is also a tangled dimension that we understand some things about it, but the more that you really investigate the material world, it's like poking a stick into a swamp or something like that. You don't exactly hit bottom, but at some point you have to give up, and you can't exactly find the ends of it. You don't exactly know what's going on, and you wish you could, but it never kind of makes itself completely known. So it's a mysterious place. And we said that one version of the tree is reflection of a tree in water. And of course, another common version of the upside down tree, which we mentioned last week, which should be common to all of us denizens of the 21st century, is the root of the, in software. When you go to your computer, you have the root directory of your computer is at the top, and all the branches go downward. So, that's interesting that we definitely have a second version of the upside down banyan tree in our modern culture that we can relate to. And all of us use computers, and any of us who have had to search for some file that got stored, unfortunately, before we chose where it was going to be stored, we have to look for it in that banyan tree of downward expanding folders and subfolders and subfolders of subfolders. And if we're lucky, we know how to do that, but most of us don't know how to do that. So we wind up doing it by hand, and it takes a long time. So at any rate, one might ask, and it's interesting because lately I've been watching these on the internet debates between people who are putting forward Darwin's theory of evolution and the intelligent design idea. And oftentimes, people who are atheistic and are critical of those who have a religious or a spiritual outlook, they say that, actually I think Bertrand Russell was very famous for having said, somebody asked him the question, my dear Bertrand Russell, if you died and you appeared before God, and he asked you, my dear Bertrand, why did you not believe me in me all this time? Bertrand said, I would have to answer, my dear sir, you never gave me any real credible evidence of your existence. So this was Bertrand Russell's reply. But of course, many atheists resonate with this, and, oh great. And we can wonder why it is that if God exists, oh my God, I forgot that sometimes this is like diffusing
some napkins, kind of paper towel.
So this idea that if God exists, one person said, why doesn't he write, here I am, I'm God, in stars? And he said, if I looked out of the night and I'm in the shape of stars and said, I am real, I am God, I would definitely believe in God. So why doesn't God do that? Any clue? Anybody have any answer for why God doesn't do that? If he really exists, why doesn't he come out like, with a bunch of aliens or something and land on the White House lawn and call a press conference and say, okay, you guys didn't believe in me, here I am. Now we can do an interview, And Newsweek, I'll give you your chance, and we'll do time and look. And yeah, what were you going to say?
Because people think you can be grasped by intelligence.
What?
They think you can be grasped by intelligence, like conceptualized.
Well, all right, but he actually can be grasped by intelligence, but under certain circumstances. Yeah.
From what I've come to understand, we have at one point had a choice for him to come out and say, "Hey, I'm real." To defeat the purpose of all of this.
Exactly. That's the point that I'm trying to make. He does not reveal himself because we don't want it. However, if you do want it, it turns around. But as Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita, I reserve the right not to be visible or open to those who are undevoted and unsurrendered. So we don't want Krishna, and Krishna says, all right, I'll create a place where I won't be there, or apparently won't be there. Of course, there's no place where there isn't Krishna. But it's amazing that this banyan tree world we're looking at right now, everywhere, in every atom, in every aspect of all the energies and all our bodies, and everything else is going on in New York, and New York State, and United States, and this planet, and all the other planets. He's there, but he creates a world where his external energy is able to completely mask his immanence in it. So he is immanent in every tiny aspect of the universe, but none of us can see it because we at one point chose to decide option B. Option A is we stay in the spiritual world and we interact with the Supreme Lord in a relationship. It's not a dull relationship. It's not a redundant relationship. It's not a boring relationship. It's a constantly changing and very mysterious relationship because Krishna is one of the best playwrights that one can possibly imagine. And so, but we don't have to play in his drama. We could choose another script if we want. And if we do, guess where you come? You're looking at it. So this is where you come when you opt out of plan A into plan B. And so Krishna has given us free will and he will not abrogate it or take it away. So as long as we're not interested in playing his drama, he says, okay, I'm not going to force. Enjoy the material world. But of course, you got to read the fine print. The material world isn't what we hoped it was. It wasn't the Caribbean pleasure cruise that we signed on to. It turned out to be a little less dynamic and Disney-esque than that. So we got stuck with this material world. And eventually, as we bump around in this material world, we come to see some of the really kind of nasty things about it, you know. And of course, another issue that seems to come up in these creation and intelligent design arguments is God appears to be a sadist, you know, that he's creating a world where we're so many kinds of suffering going on. There's people dying, there's people being killed, people starving to death, there's wars, there's people being tortured, there's horrible diseases. So if these intelligent design people are so intelligent, why are they talking about a God that appears to create such a place? It doesn't seem too intelligent to me. So what might be a reply to this, you know, challenge? Anybody have any clues? Yeah.
So we get fed up and, you know, we accept Krishna and, you know, we get
Right. Well, the thing that I always think of, you're basically saying when the direction that I'm going, that the whole world as we know it is got the carrot and the stick everywhere. In government, there's a carrot and a stick. When you don't do what the government says, there's a stick. If you do what the government says, usually there's not a carrot. But at any rate, sometimes occasionally there's a government carrot if you actually work for the government. Unless it's in those circumstances, there's no carrot. And in school, when we go to schools, there's a carrot and a stick. When we go to the workplace, we work for somebody, there's a carrot and a stick. When we deal with social justice issues, there's a carrot and a stick. In every aspect of human life, there's a carrot and a stick. So the Supreme Lord also has a system of karma where there's a carrot and a stick. That when you cause others to suffer, is it so unimaginable that that suffering boomerangs back to you at some point in the future? Of course, the interesting thing is there's a time delay. That's the tricky part. A time delay. So occasionally instant karma gets you, but generally it isn't instant. Generally there's this conveyor belt and it rolls around and rolls around, and then you get whacked and you think the gods must be crazy, you know, that why me? No, someone made a mistake somewhere. Someone must have made a mistake. I want to see the ombudsman. I want to create my, I want some kind of attrition here. I want some kind of advocate for me, that I was misread, I was mishandled by the universe. Of course, this isn't exactly what's happening. It's just that there's a time delay. And of course, most people in the Western world, although officially In many religious doctrines, reincarnation is not accepted. Actually, many people in the Western world, at least in America, also have a belief that maybe reincarnation does exist. And this explains why even children or people who apparently have done nothing obviously wrong in this life have some sudden difficult thing happening to them. So God makes a world where there's definitely carrots and sticks, and you can suffer and you can die, and horrible things can happen to you. But ultimately, no one can lay a glove on the soul. For the soul, there's never birth nor death at any time. He does not come into being. He is not come into being, and he will not come into being. He is eternal. And so the soul cannot be cut, dried, burned, or withered away. We hear all this in the second chapter of Bhagavad-gita. The body certainly can be. And so the body can be mangled, destroyed, or tortured, and all these kind of things. But the soul ultimately cannot be harmed in any kind of way, and the soul goes on. And whenever we are getting some difficult situation, it is because of our own misdeeds at some time in the recent past or the more distant past. And so this is why, another thing that comes up in these creation and intelligent design arguments is it appears that the bodies are not designed well. One scientist said, I've got a life expectancy of about 80 or 90 years, and I'm not good with that. Why did the Creator make a body with that kind of life expectancy? And so again, people have this idea that our bodies are maximized for our enjoyment. And yes, that's a part of the design for our enjoyment, but the stick part is also there, the perdition part, that when we do something that we shouldn't have done, there is another angle of the material creation that's also a part of the design, it's not a mistake, is there to award us the unfortunate backwash of the things we did wrong. So our bodies, we would all like to look like movie stars and have, very nice physiques and be very attractive. And if you really want that, work hard and do a lot of pious activity. You can go to the heavenly planets where people actually do that, where you can look like a movie star and look like that for, millions of years. You live for a long time there. It's an interesting place, but in the end, you have to also leave that location. It's not permanent. So that's not worth it either. So the material body is designed so that we get in it a nice rounded package of things we did right and things we did wrong. That's why we look at it in the mirror in the morning and think, here it is again. I have to do something with it, So we got this body because we did some things right in the past and we did some things wrong in the past. And the ratio and the way and the specific right things and the specific wrong things we did give us a nation of birth, a culture, an age, all these other upadhis or designations that go along with the body. So meanwhile, we begin to see that this material world is like a very dark, mysterious, entangling banyan tree. And you can climb out on the limbs, but you never seem to get to the bottom of anything. Any individual that tries to expand his knowledge by climbing through and climbing around on the various limbs eventually just poops out because it never comes to an end. And you can explore more and more limbs. You can go up, you can go down. As we discussed last week in the banyan tree, that there's limbs going upward and branches going downward. The ones going upward lead to the heavenly planets, where people are acting according to Vedic prescription, which is giving them good karma, and their limbs going downward, which are people who are working against Vedic prescriptions, and they're working their way gradually down to animal species, and lower forms of life. So this whole world actually has a meaning. There actually is a reason why we have animals, why we have plants, how the world came into existence, why there is suffering, what happens when you do the right thing, what happens when you do the wrong thing. All these things are subsumed and tied up nicely in one philosophy that's self-consistent and very expansive. And the more you hear about it, and the more you think about it, it becomes obvious that sooner or later we just have to take it on board and actually do something about it. Because once we learn about philosophy, then it's incumbent upon us to change our lives. And of course, that's, as Shakespeare would put it, therein lies the rub. And so we have to work at changing our lives. And that's not easy. But as we also know, if you decide to turn your back on a progressive life, you get to suffer anyways. So you suffer if you choose spiritual life and to work hard to perfect your life. And if you decide to turn your back on it, you get to suffer too. So that's the nice thing about the material world. Either way you go, it's going to get you. You know, it's just designed that way. It's marcha locum, dushalayama shashvatam, dukalayama shashvatam. Dukkha is the Sanskrit word for suffering, dukkha. Dukalayama shashvatam. So it is temporary and miserable. And but when you take up spiritual life, you plug into a deeper dimension to the spiritual world, and therefore the difficulties of the material world and the ups and downs of the material world are not so difficult to bear. And you begin to realize that all I really have to do is just get out of this place. I'll never be able to change it into the spiritual world. That's not its design. That's not its function. But I can get out of it, and I can help other people to get out of it. And there's another world, a real world. We use this analogy of the banyan tree. Now I can use the analogy of the camera or the, video, that we look at an image on a screen and we know somewhere there's a real person. Like maybe somebody will be looking at this film sometime, and they know that someone as ugly as me actually must really exist in the material world somewhere. And someday they might have the misfortune to run across me in real life. But they're seeing a two-dimensional image of me. And right now, all they see is a two-dimensional image, but they imagine that there must be a real person. Of course, I know we live in the age of computer-generated imagery and all that kind of stuff, so it is possible to generate images that do exist nowhere but on a computer, but most of the times we can tell the difference, at least most of the times. Any rate, the point is that there is a virtual version, the video image, and there's a real version. So the video image has some relationship to the real version, and the real version has some relationship to the video image, but there is also some differences. The video image is only two-dimensional. It goes only one way. Someone can see me, but I can't see them. Unlike Captain Kangaroo used to do. And I'm dating myself now. That back in the days of Captain Kangaroo, he used to hang hold up this little mirror. He said, "Oh, I see Susie and Jimmy." And I said, "Gosh, he sees me." Of course, for kids, that's the way they think, that the camera works both ways. That just as they can see Captain Kangaroo, he can see them. But at any rate, actually, it's only one way, and it's only two-dimensional. So similarly, everything we see in this world is, as I put it, a Kmart version. Sorry, Kmart. I don't really mean to impugn your, value in culture and in our mercantile world. But Kmart version of something that exists somewhere else in the spiritual dimension. So in the spiritual dimension, we have a real world, and this world is a facsimile of it, a image, a likeness of it. And we were using an analogy the other day that just as, in a minute, when I get through shutting my mouth, and we'll get around to offering some food to go into people's mouths. But instead of the food, if we passed around photographs of the food, we'd say, all right, now we're going to line up for prasadam, and we gave you each a photograph of a plate of food. You would say, well, yeah, that's prasadam. But, is that where it's going to be? So in a similar way, the material world is like that. It appears to be real, and in one sense it is. We don't actually come out and say the material world is unreal. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But in one sense, it's unreal because it is not what it appears to be. And the material world is made up of collections of atoms. And they appear like something, but they are not that thing that they appear like. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to ask for questions, and then we're going to break for another program. So anybody have any questions or realizations about what we've just discussed? Yeah.
Raj, I had a conversation with someone once about this topic of if a God exists, why doesn't he just show? Why doesn't he just reveal himself? And a point that I raised was that, well, if you're atheistic, even if he shows himself and he reveals all his potencies to you, you'll still deny his existence. You'll still say that was an illusion, some type of trick that you did, or whatever the case may be. So really, he's not showing himself, as you said. It's because you don't want to see him for who he actually is. You don't want to know or remember that he exists. So, of course, the person understood that point, and then we moved on to other things. But that's something that's often glossed over.
Right, right.
The fact that most of us, if we can acknowledge God's existence, then there comes a sense of, well, if he's the ruler, if he's the creator or whatever, if he's the original person, then am I supposed to please him? Am I supposed to follow him? We start to remember what our constitutional position is. And then from that, we have to follow. So, and we don't want to follow. So, yeah, like you said, it defeats the purpose.
That's a good point, that actually Duryodhana and Kamsa, they both saw Krishna. And they had no sense of his divinity. Even Duryodhana saw Krishna revealed his universal form. And he said, Krishna performed some yoga. That's what he said. So here you have, an actual instance of what you're saying, that Duryodhana saw Krishna reveal his universal form. See, Krishna had gone to the camp of the Kurus to try to broker a peace settlement before the Battle of Kurukshetra. He was the last attempt to broker a peace settlement between the Kurus and the Pandavas before the big war took place. So Krishna went there, and he tried to convince Duryodhana that his tenacious refusal to give the Pandavas even a tiny piece of the kingdom was ruinous. And so Duryodhana hatched a plan where he was going to capture Krishna. So he had people stationed, and they were going to, fall upon Krishna and capture him. And as they started to implement their plan, Krishna said, "Oh, you think I've come alone?" And from his body, he manifested demigods. Suddenly he was looking at the entire universal form. And their mouths were just open. They couldn't move. And then Krishna just kind of retracted it and walked out. And later on, Duryodhana recounted the episode as Krishna performed some yoga. You know, in other words, to him it was a magic trick of some kind or another. You know, so a magic trick, as you say. That there's also a saying in India that if a thief sees the Supreme Lord, he'll only see his pockets. You know, so you know. That's kind of, you know, the way that we relate, you know, according to our own understanding. Yeah, you have
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Christine, Hare Krishna.
I had this dilemma maybe a couple of days ago. I was speaking to one of my good friends who is a spiritualist, imperialist in a sense.
Empiricist.
Yes, empiricist. And I was telling him how I'm tired of the material, you know, and how I want to be with Krishna. That is my goal, is to be. And he saw it as if like a depression or escapism, and it's like how do you word these things to people so that they understand that you're not depressed? If anything, you're the happiest that you've ever been, right? Yeah. But you're strong-willed to stick to a path to get out, right? So how do you word this without people thinking, oh my God, this person is depressed, this person is, you know, you're not happy, you don't like life, you know, like, so how?
Well, sometimes you can explain it to people that I'm not depressed, but I'm not interested in what the material world has to offer. I'm interested in another world. And I believe that world more important than the material world. Of course, oftentimes I keep using the adage that I heard long ago that a nod is as good as a wink to a blind horse, you know. So, you know, there are some people that just won't get it, you know, because they don't want to get it, you know. And there's another famous saying, too, that, you know, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So some people, there's nothing you can say because their own attitude filters what they can see. So, as we were just mentioning with Lee, you know, that if Krishna himself stands before Duryodhana and exhibits the universal form, I mean, what more could you ask for a demonstration of the divinity? But he will package that in some other way. And so you give it a shot, and then you move on. So the idea of para upakara is to give people actually an understanding of why they're suffering. And then they themselves can shut off that endless conveyor belt of new bad karma gradually working its way to them, as we talked about with the time delay. And yes, sometimes as devotees or as a movement, we do other kinds of welfare work like you know, many other religious organizations do. But we never come to the stage where we put all of our energy into that, because the para upakara is much more important. That if we can save people from the endless repetition of junk karma, you know, which is the default nature of this world. It's just the default way of doing things. So if a person doesn't know or doesn't make a specific endeavor, they will be going in the direction of the default, you know, flow of the material world. And until that changes, nothing substantial will change in their lives, you know. And that's why sometimes this material world is also, I compare it to a Ferris wheel. So you get on at the bottom, you go up, and then when you get to the top, you go back down, and then you get up. So on the very bottom rung of the Ferris wheel of karma, we have people who have seriously bad karma because of things they've done wrong in the past. So they're very bottom of society. And earmarks or qualities that have to do with bad karma are the inverse of the good karma hallmarks, you know. So Janmai Shvarya Shruta Shri. So a person has a good background or good family, good looks, wealthy, politically important, famous, So these are called opulences, actually. Parasara Muni mentions several opulences, that a person can be, wealthy, strong physically or politically. One can be attractive, famous. One can be knowledgeable or intelligent. Or one can be also attractive, and one can be renounced. So these are the opulences. People with good karma have an abundance of those qualities, and people with bad karma are diametrically opposite, people who have an absence of those things. And a brief look around the world will demonstrate that we see this everywhere. People have different admixtures of these things. And so at the bottom are people with all the mostly bad karma. And because you're at the bottom rung, you have a lot of wants. You cannot satisfy your immediate material desires. And that puts you actually in a very good position in one way, because you cannot exert yourself to do a lot of sinful activities because you just don't have the resources to do it. And secondly, you're suffering, so that is burning off bad karma. So as a person burns off some bad karma, they start to rise up on the Ferris wheel. And as they rise up a little on the Ferris wheel, they begin to look around and see people who were like them yesterday. And they think, I know what that's like. I was there. I want to help them. So they reach out, they do welfare work, and they extend themselves. And this means that they are accruing even more good karma. So they're rising farther up on this Ferris wheel. And then at some point, though, either in one lifetime or maybe in a succession of lifetimes, they're on a higher rung. And now they have facilities because now their karma's been expiated through their suffering and difficulty and through their charitable work and their reaching out to others. So now they have resources at their disposal. And because they're not self-controlled or they're not really dedicated to spiritual life, the tendency will be to misuse those things. And as a result of misusing them, we're starting to accrue negative karma again. And those people in the very top rung of the good karma, they tend to feel that somehow they're special. And they tend to look down on people on the lower ranks of things because they have influence, they have wealth, they have political power, and they can move things if they want. And so they tend to see others as like insects or as, at least pawns to move around because they have that ability. They don't recognize that with great, good karmic, merit comes extreme responsibility. Because if you just utilize it for your own aggrandizement, you are misusing it. And this is what usually happens. And that's why people start going back down the Ferris wheel on the other side. And you see it's just an endless loop. That people on the bottom are gradually going up, the people on the top are gradually going down. And it just goes over and over again until somebody realizes, I want off this Ferris wheel. And that's what spiritual life is about. You discover that, okay, according to your birth, parentage, your country, et cetera, you've got some good stuff, some bad stuff. And so instead of spending 99% of your human energy going from this spot on the Ferris wheel to this spot on the Ferris wheel, you instead use that energy to get off the Ferris wheel. And that's what spiritual life is about.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
If you get off the Ferris wheel,
right.
How does that benefit humanity?
Well, you're helping other people to get off the Ferris wheel. That's how you get off the Ferris wheel. If you really want a shortcut to get off the Ferris wheel, you help other people get off the Ferris wheel. And that's why spiritual life is kind of, we were all, happily going to hell in a wicker basket, and someone came along and said, Bubba, wake up. And we thought, wait a minute, what are you talking? Get out. Oh, maybe you got something to say. And then we listened to it, and after a while, maybe he's got something there. And then we changed our life. And now it's incumbent upon us to help the next people go there. And so that's kind of how it works. And we get out. Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam says, "My dear Lord, I do not want to go to the spiritual world, leaving these fools and rascals behind. Let me somehow help them too." So that's the compassion, actually, that we begin to see where compassion has the most bang for its buck and what will help people in the most direct way. And then, we always know that we can never trample free will in anybody, but we give it our shot, and to the degree we ourselves are making spiritual advances, to that degree we'll be able to reach the heart of others. And then, any rate, if we can't reach this person's heart, we go to the next person, and eventually, some people are reproved. Any other questions or comments? So, Sasha in the back there. We're going to what, so 7:30? Okay, we're going to do a kirtan now. Okay. Kali, you want to make kirtan?
No, Maharaj, please. I did the first kirtan.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I thought it was Atma was going to.
Just the Jai Radha Madhava for like 3 minutes.
Okay.